Rumor is on live. Hello, everyone. Sorry, we're having a little bit of live event technical difficulties today. And there's the live button. That's what I was waiting for.
Yep.
Welcome to the Microsoft Teams Binge-worthy webinar series that Pate Group and Joy of SharePoint are doing together during this crazy COVID time. Hope everyone's been having a great week so far. We've got one more day till Friday, people.
That's right. You
We're
can do
making it.
it.
Today we are going to be talking all about tabs. If this is your first time joining us, welcome, welcome. I am Joy Apple, also known as Joy of SharePoint. I work with Pate Group as a modern workplace strategist, also host the Joy of SharePoint webinar series. Been doing this fun thing for about 12 years now in the Microsoft space. I've worn a few different hats, as I think we all have, as we've gotten settled into our Microsoft 365 careers. I have with me Richard. Richard, how is your day going?
Day's going great, Joy. Thanks so much for asking. Thanks to everybody who's joining us today. My name is Richard Calderon. I'm with Pate, also a modern workplace strategist as Joy. Been doing the Microsoft consulting things for a number of years now, going on about 20 years or so. And what we do effectively is we talk about and love to do all things Microsoft 365, and specifically as it comes to how you collaborate and communicate, leveraging some of these awesome services like Microsoft Teams. And that's the reason why we wanted to bring this webinar series here to you. So again, thanks for joining. This is episode 7 already now that we're doing.
Already.
So if you'd like to see any of the recordings for any of the previous sessions, we've got those sessions also available out on YouTube as well. Because we're having some slight technical difficulties, just one slight pivot from normal, just want to kind of mention to you here is normally we would have a Q&A panel. Don't know that any of you are seeing a Q&A panel in the live event because we don't see it here on our end where we normally would. So we thought that if you did want to submit some questions and just engage with us as you typically would do through the Q&A, we might ask that you just do that via Twitter. So we've got the Pate Group Twitter handle up on the screen, at Pate Group. And then if you would, in your question, go ahead and hashtag it with hashtag Teams Tabs. That'll just help us be able to get targeted back to you fairly quickly. So we'll give it a try. Hopefully during the next event, things will be working with Q&A again. But at least for today, that gives you an avenue to be able to interact with us during the event. So we appreciate your flexibility there. So we're going to go ahead and flip over to some poll questions because this is pretty par for the course for us here. We just like to get to know who's in the room. The first question is basically just who's who. What I'll do here is for those of you that just have your mobile device handy, if you point it at the screen, you can just turn on your camera, scan this QR code, and that'll take you to this particular question on your mobile device and whatever browser that opens up, and you can respond to the poll questions there. So I'll just do the same thing for the next few questions as well. But again, first questions here is really just centered around who's in the room. Again, if you have your mobile device and have the ability to respond to that here, please feel free to go ahead and do that. Let me see if we're getting any responses at the moment now. It looks like maybe not just yet, and that's okay. I will go ahead and throw the QR code back up here just for the sake of doing it. You know what we will do too, at a bare minimum, is we'll ensure that we've got these links posted out on Twitter. We'll tweet them out, and then that way, is that right, Stacy?
Yep. I have the first 2 out on Twitter. The third one should be posting.
Okay, perfect. So that way, you could just respond at any point in time during the course of the webinar. Feel free to respond. That just gives us a little bit more information about who's attending, and we love that. And then just for the sake of it, I'll go ahead and at least pull up the other questions. Again, these are things that we'll have in the recording that you can refer to later as well. The second question is, so specific to thinking about tabs in Teams, which we're going to talk about today. When you're working in Teams, what's the most common reason or reasons that you might switch from Teams to another window or another screen or another app? And so maybe like, needing to read or respond to an email. I'm going to go ahead and throw the QR code up here, by the way, while we're doing this. To review a task or a project management app, maybe to work on a document, maybe to go out to SharePoint to access some pages of news or lists, etc., or maybe to browse a website, or any and all of those. So if you also would respond to those as well, and again, we might not be getting any responses just yet because of the access to the links. But again, when you get a chance, feel free to respond to question number 2 as well. And then interestingly enough, when we thought that the Q&A was going to be working, I think I know the answer to this question already here, but the question, and maybe we'll ask it next webinar too. What do you think, Joy?
Sure.
Was interested to know if you were responding to the survey directly from your PC, which we would normally have done from links in the Q&A. In this case, again, I think Stacy's posting out those links on Twitter. Or if you're using this QR code capability to scan from your mobile device. Just interested to know who's doing that here. And again, I'm not necessarily expecting to see responses, just getting people kind of pulled into the polls here at this point. So no problem. Again, if you get a chance to get to those links, feel free to respond to those at any point in time.
Do me a favor, if you would, go to question number 2 and let's refresh that, because I did go ahead and submit my answer because it's the most annoying part for me.
Yeah.
Let's just make sure we're getting some.
Okay, sure, no problem.
Yeah.
Look. Don't see the responses, interestingly enough. I'll do a quick refresh of this and see if it landed in there. Okay, well, we are getting a few responses.
There we go, yay.
Okay, all right,
so
great.
I think I have noticed, and we love our Microsoft products, all of them, and I will do a shout out to the folks that work behind the scenes in the product teams for Microsoft. They are actually working very, very hard to take as much feedback as they can get from people right now working from home and are pushing to roll updates out. So if you have noticed some oddness here and there in the platform, such as perhaps a Q&A panel not being available, or, just some delays, just know it's because they are trying really hard to keep up with an extremely heavy amount of demand all of a sudden. Can't imagine why. And trying to get some updates pushed out.
Yeah, that's good. That's a really great point, Joy. So thanks for giving a little bit of a shout out there to Microsoft, because they're really doing everything they can, obviously, in the service to be able to accommodate all of the increase of usage that's going on here. So if you see some strange things, great point that Joy makes there. Okay, well, then let's get on to the continuation of the webinar at this point. Today we wanted to talk about tabs. We've been talking about a number of things in the context of Microsoft Teams over the past few episodes. And we started drilling into some specific areas a little bit deeper. Last webinar, we drilled more specifically into files and how you can interact with files, manage files, share files, etc. inside of Teams. Today we thought we'd focus specifically on tabs and what are tabs inside of Teams. So what are tabs basically? You can really think of tabs as sort of, it's the Teams versions of a link. It's linking to something. It could be a file, it could be an application or a tool of some sorts. Tabs, we'll show some demonstration here in a little bit. You can actually include tabs either in Teams channels, or you can actually include tabs also in chat that you have individually with people. But you can really, again, think of tabs as being able to pull in a number of different services and tools from Microsoft 365, as well as a large number of third-party tools into Teams and channels, as well as into chat as well. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. So what can a tab do essentially here? So you can tab to a number of things. Again, we talked about files and SharePoint resources. You can tab to videos that are stored in stream via channels or directly to a particular video. You can tab to forms, third-party applications, websites. Again, the list kind of goes on and on and on. We're going to talk a little bit more about those as we go. Okay, well, actually, this is a good time to do that. So let's flip over here to, I've got a demonstration environment up and running. So I mentioned a minute ago that there's kind of two places that you can think about where tabs come in Microsoft Teams. It's either going to be in the context of a team channel, or in the context of a chat that you're having with either one person or a group-based chat. There's some differences depending on the two. Let me end that, sorry. Okay, so here I've got a demo environment going up. I've got a couple of different teams that this user is a member of. And then in this case here for this Mark 8 project team, you see that I've got a number of channels here that the team is divided into. So if I just browsed into a particular channel, for example, so I'm going to click in here into research and development. These things across the top here in the channel itself, this is what Microsoft refers to as these tabs. So you have a number of tabs that when you create a brand new channel get built by default. So I'll just kind of give you an example of what that looks like. If I just say add new channel, and I'm just going to call this my new channel to lack of imagination here at the moment, and just say add.
Naming things is part of a demo.
Yeah, exactly. I guess I could have called it demo channel too, but when you create a brand new channel, this is the kind of the out of the box experience, if you will. What you get are these default tabs across the top, these three. You'll get posts, which again, these are all the conversations that you and other team members are having, and there's a lot of great things you can do in the context of posts. You also get a files tab. We talked about that in just the last webinar as well too. This is really the primary way with which you interact with files in the context of a team. That's all powered behind the scenes by SharePoint. And then you also get this wiki tab too. Some organizations find that wiki capability useful, others don't. I think in many cases it tends to be just sort of a team cultural type thing. If you can get people really kind of bought in on the use of wikis for any number of things that you want to document and make available to the team, then you have a wiki page available to you as well here. But you have these three tabs by default. And so you can see here in the middle of the posts tab, it says, let's get the conversation started. You can add other tabs, and it's kind of giving you some examples of ones that you might add, Planner and OneNote and a website. And if you click on this plus sign here, this is the equivalent of clicking on this plus sign here, just to the right of Wiki, which is basically going to open up this just glorious view. And again, this depends on how you have this set up in your organization. Here in the demo, we've kind of got everything all turned on. In your organization, the folks that administrate teams might have reduced this down to some smaller limit. But what you'll see when you click this add a tab is at the very top, by and large, the majority of these are all first-party Microsoft sets of tools and applications. And then you notice down here at the bottom is this ever-increasing number of third-party tools that Microsoft has integrated with to be able to effectively pull that experience into Microsoft Teams so that you can avoid that context switch of having to flip from Teams over to some application. I know Joy was playing around with Hey Taco the other day to sort of see what that's all about. And so there's some interesting ones out there. Yes, Stacy. Nope, doing good? Okay, all right. Okay, so, just wanted to kind of point out that this is something that you can browse your way through just to kind of get a general sense of what kind of applications you could pull in as a tab inside of Microsoft Teams. But let me just show kind of some of my favorite ways that you can start thinking about tabs and teams here. I see that Lydia has mentioned me here, so let me just click on this. Great, so Lydia is, in this case, Joy, actually logged in as Lydia, is sharing the spreadsheet template in this case here, so we can interact with this file in a conversation, obviously relatively easily here. So there's a number of different things that we can do here. You notice that on Office documents specifically, that is Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Microsoft makes sort of a one-click easy way for you to be able to pin or make this particular document a tab in this particular channel. So in this case here, I just clicked on this little more attachment options ... And the option here at the bottom says make this a tab, as you can see. So if I click on make this a tab, lo and behold, it does exactly what you think it was going to do. It's going to just include a new tab here just to the right of Wiki, and it's actually going to just render that particular document, in this case an Excel spreadsheet, right here inside the context of Teams, which is a really slick way to be able to provide your team, again, kind of one-click access to any type of content, documentation, anything that you might want to highlight to them and have accessible to them relatively easily, you can just make that a tab just with a single click. Again, that works for Word documents, PowerPoint documents, Excel documents at a bare minimum. There might be some others, I can't recall, Joy or not, but you could do that make as a tab pretty easily, okay? You certainly could, just to kind of complete that thought, you certainly could do that the other way around, which is to say you could click on add a tab, and then when this pop-up window comes up, if you know it's an Excel spreadsheet, you could click on Excel. When that comes up, you notice that that document is right here. You could select that document in this case. You would have to rename it because by default, the Excel tab wants to just simply name the tab Excel. So you want to rename it to something more meaningful, maybe the name of the spreadsheet or some abbreviation of some sort. But you could do it that way too. So you could either click on it and say make this a tab, or you could go into a new tab and pull it in that way. Okay. So again, that works for all those Office documents. I will point out that another very common type of file that you might want to make as a tab is a PDF. So you have an option to do a PDF as well too. The key about PDFs is you have to have those PDFs inside the Teams files location first before you can actually make it a tab. So you can't just upload and then make a PDF file a tab all in one fell swoop. You have to have that PDF inside of the files tab to begin with. But you could do PDFs in this case. I'll tell you one of my favorite ones. I'm also interested in what Joy's favorite tabs are too. But one of my favorite ones is this one that's just simply called website. Because again, a number of times you've got either internal or maybe even external websites that you're using for any number of reasons that you effectively want to be able to put as sort of one-click access for your team to be able to get to. So for example here, like maybe I want to put a link, to the Pate Group website. I will point out one thing here. You'll notice that it says that you do have to put websites in with the HTTPS URL because of the security of the S in this case. It doesn't accept as a valid URL if you don't put HTTPS in this case. But if I did Pate Group, I could choose either to post to the channel about this tab or not, but when I hit save, then you'll see again, all that's going to do relatively easily is it's just going to render that entire website right here as a tab inside of this particular channel. Really useful again, okay, so that maybe something that you do is you work with customers on projects and you want to be able to just have a one-click way to go to your customer's external facing website so that anybody across the team can easily go and get oriented about, who is this company and what do they do and things like that. Or again, if it's an internal website, you could always use that as well too. As long as you can get to it through the HTTPS in the URL, then you can have it there. One other thing I'll just point out briefly here is on the far right-hand side of the screen, notice a couple of different options here that you get. This one here where you can expand this tab just kind of gets rid of that left side section there and kind of expands it out a little bit bigger for you here too. And then you also have this option, which is sometimes a website maybe just isn't quite rendering correctly inside this tab. It just depends on what's going on the website. You can click this option here, which just is simply going to crack open a web browser, again, directly to that website. So pretty useful, I feel like, having those there. How about you, Joy? Any other tabs that come to mind specifically that are just ones that you're like, hey, that's a good one to include for a team? Or
Oh, lots, but I'll condense it down. So I think if you've been around very often, you've seen that when we do our internal demo, it's based on a project. And a lot of times when you're working in projects, you need to be able to get to specific files very quickly, very easily. Our project manager is constantly saying, have you looked at the project plan?
Right.
When your stuff's due, right? So again, it's that it might be a website tab, it might be a document tab. It just depends on what it is and where you need to get it from. But I'll reiterate, those are great ones to put up there. Planner, holy moly.
Oh, yes.
Planner tab is unbelievable.
Yep.
And
yeah.
Of course, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to try to find, I think I've got one here in the demo where there's a planner tab. Yep, got one here. So I think in a very near future webinar, Stacy, we're going to focus in on planner. So again, we'll just kind of touch on it a little bit here, but then we'll go into it in a lot more detail in the next, whenever that webinar is. I think it's coming up soon. But here's an example of where this particular team had what's called a planner board. And this is a plan, a way for the team to be able to track activities for this product launch event, specifically the sales and marketing team is working on. And so as you can see here, if you're familiar with Planner, this is the Planner board here, rendering right as a tab. You've got those same kind of actions over here on the right-hand side where I can expand this to make this a little bit bigger. It's by and large, I would say about 90% of the same interactivity that you have when you actually go out to Planner in the web browser. But the fact that you can group by and change the groupings, you can go to the charts, you can go to the schedule view, you can interact with this in this way, you can drag and drop things around. So it really is really useful to be able to have Planner, if you have tasks and activities for the team, pinned as a tab into a channel where that makes sense. So yeah, I think that's a great one as well too. Really useful.
We'll have a lot of insight. It feels like there's such good integration with the Planner tab inside of Teams. Sometimes we don't always realize that it actually is its own separate thing. So more goodies are coming for that when we do the Planner webinar. I'll also point out, if you would be so kind, Richard, to click the Add a Tab button. Dun, dun, dun. One of these tabs that comes in here, well, let's talk about two of them. SharePoint Document Library.
Yeah, that's a great one.
So you don't have to have all of the content you want to be able to access through Teams crammed into Files tabs. You can have your invoice library, your contracts library, your policies library, and tab to it, right? You can absolutely use that SharePoint site. It's there to work in, to be organized, and to manage your stuff. So you can still absolutely use that. And notice he's seeing content for more than just this one team connected site. Any site that he has permission to, he can go tab to that library. You want to make sure your other teammates have that permission too, otherwise it'll be frustrating for them. But yeah, you can use those resources. And here again, Teams does just make it a very generic name. So we want to let folks know which document library it is. And then you can also tab to other areas of your SharePoint site. I was working with a team recently, and they were very concerned that all the work they put to their SharePoint homepage was for nothing because people were just going to want to be in Teams all the time. You can tab to that homepage. You can do the website tab. You could do the news and pull in your news articles from SharePoint. It's awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah, so there's a couple of things just to what Joy is pointing out. You'll notice that there's two distinctly different tabs that you can pull in when it's specific to SharePoint. One is that connecting to a document library in this case. So that's targeted towards being able to pull in files from a document library, at least the view of those files into your channel. Whereas what she was also mentioning around SharePoint, I'll click on this one too, is so if you're leveraging SharePoint for all the great things that SharePoint can do, such as being able to communicate news across the team or across the organization, or leveraging lists for any number of things that lists are awesome at doing, I think that's another webinar we might actually crack into, Joy, for sure, right? We're doing centered around SharePoint as well too, so lots of really cool things there. But yeah, so the point is, you could, for example, here's a news article. Maybe I just want to select that news article, hit save, and again, what you'll notice here in a second, once my machine actually responds, is this is just going to give a little bit of a view, ta-da, into this particular page sitting on the SharePoint site. So it's this big, beautiful news site. But then also here too, again, not to steal thunder from the SharePoint session that we're going to have, but you can do a tab to list items, for example. So let's say I went back into the SharePoint tab here and I wanted to, rather than a page, I wanted to select a list. Also notice there's an option here that you can say add a page or list from any SharePoint site. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily have to just be the one that you're in, but maybe you want it, there's a product list here. So you want to actually pull in a product list that is part of that SharePoint site as a tab. You can just very easily render that here And again, once that shows up here, you also have the ability to be able to tweak this view. You can do formatting. You'll notice that on this particular example, we're doing kind of the alternating rows formatting kind of thing, but you can do conditional formatting and add metadata. And again, we'll talk more about that when we get into the SharePoint session as well.
That'll be a good one. And if there's anyone out there like me, oh, I wish we had our Q&A panel because I want some feedback. I guess you can always hit us up on Twitter at Joy's SharePoint, at Kate Group, hashtag Teams Tabs. Okay, that's a lot of information.
Yeah.
But I personally don't enjoy working inside of Excel at all, ever.
Just not an Excel person, huh?
It kills my inner child. So I'm just saying SharePoint lists are the product for you, or the platform for you, the tool for you, if you just cannot stand Excel. But other than that, I had one thing I wanted to circle back to on the website tab.
Sure.
Let's say that you work for a department that works a lot with a state agency. I'm just making this up as I go. And you and several members of your team need to go to that external website. Maybe you have shared credentials for it. Maybe you each have your own login. But I've been in a lot of environments where people use shared credentials because they're coming in as an entity to access an external site. You can absolutely tag to that external website. You will have to log in. But that could really start to streamline some of what you do day to day.
Yep.
If you do choose to use that website tab to come back into SharePoint, especially now that we're working from home, you're going to probably be prompted to log in more frequently than you would have been if you were sitting in your office behind your firewall and your domain and all that fun stuff. So just be aware of that.
Yep, good point. So there's some nuances there when you're using that website tab. But again, we all encourage you to give it a try, explore. There's no harm in creating these tabs, seeing how they work, and then if they're not working out for you, just remove them effectively. So definitely,
I don't have to list them forever if I don't want to keep them.
That's right. That's exactly right. So or any chance we're getting any questions or anything coming in on Twitter just yet? Nothing.
Not just yet, but if anybody isn't comfortable with Twitter, you can always, I'm not going to say this too loud, but you all have my email address.
Yeah.
And you feel free to submit your questions and I'll keep an eye out for them.
Okay, awesome. Sounds good. Well, there's more to show. So let's just keep talking about tabs here a little bit longer. So again, when you click on the plus sign, you've got a whole lot of toys to play with here effectively and to experiment around with. Depending again on what licensing you have in your organization and what kind of tools you've started leveraging and so forth. You got some others here that are all part of Microsoft's tool bag of tools for tabs. One is Power BI as an example. That one, depending on what your team does and depending on the types of reports and so forth that you need to make accessible, if you're doing some really kind of heavy data analytics and need to gain that insights using a tool like Power BI, and I'm going to have to, in this demo, kind of remind myself where one might be. Here you go. Here's a dashboard called Revenue Analysis, and I can, again, just a couple of clicks, depending on to what dashboards and workspaces you have access, you can relatively easily be able to pull in Power BI content, those reports directly into a tab in Teams. And again, similar to what we were saying in Planner and some of the other tools, it's fully interactive in this case because it's all web-based. So we'll just kind of let that render there, that Power BI dashboard is rendering behind the scenes. Here it all comes in. We'll come back and click on that in a second. And then another of my favorite ones, again, depending on if this is something that you're doing in your organization, is that you can pull in video content from Microsoft Stream. And so for those of you that aren't as familiar with Stream, are we doing a webinar on Stream? I can't remember if we're doing one on Stream or not.
Right now, Stacy.
Oh, we are.
She's writing it down.
There's a lot to talk about actually when it comes to Stream. But suffice to say, video-based content and sharing of knowledge through short video snippets are not only have become a first-class citizen, but they actually are really highly sought after now these days. Or most people, when you go on the internet, or you just kind of take for granted that you might be able to gain some information or hear some news relatively quickly from a short video clip of some sort that you can watch on demand. So Stream is Microsoft's version of, you can think of sort of the YouTube for the enterprise. And so if you are have the ability to create videos and then be able to curate those videos in Microsoft Stream, you can then pull those in, again, as tabs inside of Teams. So notice here you can do either a channel or you can do a link directly to a video. But if I said channel, for example, I believe that this interface is actually going to get a little easier over time. But right now, the way you have to do that is you have to click here. It opens up Microsoft Stream in your organization. If you've got, again, some content that's out there that you want to be able to link to effectively to pull into your team, then it's going to show you content to which you have access, essentially, or your team might have access. And so in this case here, as it's rendering, you see that there are a number of popular channels and trending videos. Again, we'll talk more about that in another webinar, but maybe this one here, maybe products, is something that I want to be able to just pull that in. So one simple way, just from this location, if you wanted to, is if I hover over this here, I can literally right click on this and just say I want to copy this link. So again, just right click on this and then copy that link. And when I do that, then I can go back into Teams and paste that in here. When I do that, watch what happens here whenever you paste this in. You do this, and then kind of by magic, it just knows how to find that channel, okay? So it found that channel here. I can click on that. I can give that a name if I wanted to, or just leave it the default name, and then save. And then again, this is one of my favorite tabs because I think the interface is just really rich. It just makes it really nice and easy to pull this video content, not have to context switch, excuse me, out somewhere else. There you go. Here's all these thumbnails of all these videos. You can very easily click on them. Again, they just render right here inside the context of this tab. So pretty slick. Curious if the Power BI stuff is rendered yet at all, but.
Speaking of Power BI, we have a question. So
Sure.
Power BI reports, server report. Would they use the website tab to be able to access that? Or do they have to, how would they be able to incorporate that?
Yeah, so the way that I understand that is if it can be accessible from the internet. So in other words, if you have a way to be able to access those Power BI reports from Report Server outside your firewall and be able to authenticate as your identity to see that report, then yes, you should be able to add that as a website tab, pointing it to that Power BI report. Again, that's accessible over the web because that's where the team service sits, right? It sits out in the internet basically, so it has to have a way to be able to know how to get back into that internal website. But most likely then what it's going to do is it's going to authenticate you when you hit that tab. So as long as you can enter your credentials, or anyone else on their team enters their credentials when that's prompted in that tab, then I believe you should be able to get to it in that way. I'll be interested to know if you try that out and it does work, let us know. And if you tried that out and it doesn't work, let us know, because I would really like to understand that specific use case. Thanks for that question. Appreciate that. I think I'm sorry?
I was just giving Mike a shout out for utilizing Twitter.
Yeah.
Yay.
So I'm going to pivot here briefly, just kind of in the interest of time, over to chat, because I did mention to you briefly. Actually, no, I take it back. I'm going to tell you one more thing, at least in the context of Teams channels. So just again, as I kind of alluded to, none of these tabs are permanent for you. You can decide, I guess I should say, at any point if you wanted to remove them or rename them. And it's really as simple as when you select any of these tabs, you'll get this little drop down option here. You click that and you'll have a chance to remove at the bottom. You can rename them if you click rename, again, because maybe it just wasn't as intuitive as you'd like it to be. So rename and save that. You can also, in different cases for different tabs, go to the settings of that tab and make some changes, etc. You can also very easily reorder these tabs, at least the ones that you've added, by kind of dragging them around. So maybe I want to make this one a little further over here, and I want to pull this products one kind of further over here. So just sort of rearranging, you can do that as well too. And it did dawn upon me here too, before we leave from Teams, that I left out one of my favorite new tabs that actually just got released, I think, into Microsoft's the commercial service, or the entire service, I should say, as of this past week, which is the Yammer Communities tab. So there's always been a Yammer tab of some sorts, a flavor of that. But they've recently, if you're not aware, they've rebranded Yammer Groups as Yammer Communities, trying to kind of separate that from the term groups like Microsoft 365 groups. So they call them communities now. You notice that kind of ironically enough, the UI of this tab still refers to a Yammer group, but nonetheless, you can say search for a group in this case. So maybe there's a group, called operations. So there's one. You can say I want to select that group and save it. You can also do it by a Yammer topic. So topics in Yammer are something that's actually done through the hashtag. You hashtag posts and those become topics in Yammer. But in this case here, like in this example, you can actually pin a Yammer community as a tab, and then here you go. You've got the full feature-rich capability of the new and improved Yammer right here inside of the tab in Teams. So this can be useful for a number of reasons, but to say the very least, to avoid the context switching of having to flip over to the Yammer either in the browser or even if you use the Yammer app. But again, I think, just kind of flipping it over to Stacy might not be a bad one to kind of focus in on some of the Yammer capabilities in yet another webinar. So we got lots of things to talk to you about. Okay, so like I said I was going to do, let's switch over to chat. There's just a couple of slight differences when it comes to tabs in chat. And so I want to kind of point some of these things out to you. By default in Teams channels, I mentioned that you get those 3 tabs when you create a new channel. You get posts, you get files, and you do get wiki, whether that's useful to you or not. When you're engaging in chat, depending on whether it's one-to-one or one-to-many in a group chat, you get these default tabs. So when I'm interacting here with Lydia, who is actually Joy behind the scenes here in the demo, you get these 4 tabs by default. So instead of posts, they call it chat here. You also get files. That's a tab that allows you to be able to easily get back to the files that are being shared back and forth between the 2 people. So if I'm sharing files with Lydia in this case, or if Lydia is sharing files with me, we can go into this files tab and easily get access to that. That is persistent, by the way, in the sense that when I come back to that chat with her a week from now, a month from now, as long as we haven't moved or removed the permissions to access those files, they'll all be there, nice and easy. There is also an organization tab. I find this one actually pretty useful if you've got this set in your Office 365 tenant inside of Teams administration to show this organization structure. But what this is basically kind of what it looks like. It's effectively an org chart view of the organization. It's entirely driven by Active Directory, that is Azure Active Directory, the manager field relationship. So as long as that data is in Active Directory, it'll show this hierarchy to you. And so these little cards are actually really useful because you can do things like Lydia, I know that I'm interacting with her and I can easily see that her manager is this person, Lee. I can click on Lee and then it's going to re-render all of Lee's direct reports here. And I can see that these are all of Lydia's peers. I can also go all the way back up to the top of the hierarchy and say, I want to click on Patty, and I can see that these are all of Patty's direct reports. And then I can even drill down into different areas of the business if I wanted to just browse around through the hierarchy. You'll also notice here in this view too, that when you hover over any of these cards, you get this really useful pop-out that lets you interact with that person through this card. So I can send a message directly right here to Urban Sayers, or an email, or look at his org chart view, or even start an audio or video chat. It's really pretty slick. This is a really useful utility I found. So play around with that some if you have that set in your organization. And then there's also this activity tab that you get by default. This is also really useful. And to hopefully be clear about this, this is showing activity that Lydia has had in a team anywhere across teams to which both you and that person are a member. Okay, so that's the kind of the key part of that is both of you have to be a member of those teams in order for that activity from Lydia, in this case, to show up in this view. Okay, so useful because maybe I can recall that Lydia mentioned something at some point back. I don't remember exactly when it was or where it was, but if I select this option here, this item here in the list, for example, from a week or so back, when I click on that, what it's going to do is it's just going to automatically flip me over to that team and to that post here that you see that it highlighted. So again, I think that that's pretty useful when you've got team members with whom you've been interacting for quite some time and you just kind of want to get to certain content or activity, you could use that tab, and that's pretty useful in that case. Okay.
So fun fact on activity. I don't know about in the app, but if you're in the browser, Control will let you search for keywords on the page.
Oh, cool. Okay, yeah. Let's see. I'm just curious here. Well, I can do that. Yeah, do a Control F. So maybe I said fiscal. Oh, look at that.
Do you believe in magic?
Bernito.
That's magic, people.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot, actually. You know what? I am actually running this in a browser in a progressive app inside of Edge. So I wonder if that's I might have to try it again on the desktop. But regardless, that's pretty cool.
I'm afraid of breaking the webinar. I would go try it real quick, but I don't want to break it.
No problem. I think that's really
Stacy said thank you.
So again, I mentioned that when you're doing a one-to-one chat private between you and one other person, you'll get these 4 tabs by default. If you're doing a group-based chat, so let's say I wanted to do a chat with more than one person. Let's say I want to do, Nestor, and I also want to include Lydia in that as well. You'll notice that by default, when you do that, and you have to kind of click down here to get these tabs, sort of a little bit of a strange part of the interface. You notice that you don't see organization, you don't see activity. So those tabs don't show when you're doing that is a group chat. You only see these 2. So again, the chat between the group and the files that are being shared amongst the group. That's one difference between one-to-one and group-based chat in that case. And then also you can, just like you could before inside of a Teams channel, you can also add these additional tools and services into tabs. You notice that in chat, it pairs it down to a few specific sets of tools. In this case, any of these document types, maybe a Power BI dashboard or report, maybe a stream video or a link to a website, but a number of those other things that are really more centered around Teams, like Planner, etc., SharePoint. Those types of tabs aren't going to show when you're doing a chat between you and another person or a group of people in this case, okay? So, I mean, that's really, for the most part, what I thought would be useful to show around tabs. Do we, by chance, getting any other questions that are coming in via Twitter yet? No? Okay, that's too bad. Just one of those things. You don't have the QA panel running. Yeah. Joy, anything else that maybe you can think of you want to point out?
Well, I will say that while it's true when you're in one-on-one or group chat, you are disconnected from adding tabs that are group specific. But let's say that Megan, Nestor, and Lydia have their own planner board that the 3 of them work on, because you can create a planner board from scratch in Planner, add whoever you want to it. Maybe their little tiger team, they've got their own little initiative they're working on.
Right.
Website tab. Get the link to it and put it in that website tab, and you can absolutely add that in group chat. So, you know, we talk about in SharePoint quite a bit that sometimes you have to cheat to get what you want. And I mean, I think that's true in Teams as well. You can cheat a little bit to get some of that stuff. And I will point out too, let's say we had 10 tabs and we all felt those 10 tabs were super important at the top of our channel or chat or wherever we are. Depending on the size of monitor you're on, those will start to get condensed and go into a little drop down. If that bugs you, you might want to step back and go, okay, does everyone in this particular channel really need all 10 of these tabs, or does it make sense to put them in the channel where it's more likely I'm going to need that resource.
Yeah.
So that's just some food for thought there.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Really good point. I like that workaround that you described around being able to leverage Planner if you needed to do that through private chat with you and more than one person. It did make me think of another workaround, at least at the moment. I know that Microsoft's roadmap sometimes is you kind of need a PhD to really understand sort of what there's talking about out there because they've got so much. But I believe this whole notion of being able to have a team calendar inside of Teams is somewhere on their radar, somewhere in user voice, etc. But the way that I've seen people do this today, and we talked about this a little bit during some earlier webinar around Teams, is when a team is created behind the scenes, it's actually creating what's called now a Microsoft 365 group. There's a number of ways that you can actually instantiate or create a Microsoft 365 group, but creating a team is one of those. When you create a Microsoft 365 group, it creates this Exchange or Outlook inbox that's for the group. It's a shared inbox, and there's also a shared calendar that actually comes along for the ride when that's created. So a lot of people, one of the first questions they ask us is, how do I get that calendar for the team to show inside of Teams? And so you might wonder, well, I hit the plus sign, I'll kind of look for a calendar app, and sure enough, at least as of today, one doesn't show in there. So the workaround that I had certainly seen other people do before, and let me see if I can kind of get that pulled up here, is just simply to go to simply to go into the Microsoft 365 group for that particular team. Again, I mentioned that when you create the team, a group is being created behind the scenes for that. So I'll show you here. If you go into Outlook in the web browser, in this case is the way that I'm choosing to do that. When you go into Outlook, what you'll see down here is you'll see that there's also going to be a series of teams, groups rather, and they finally rendered here down here at the bottom. But so here are all these groups. If I click on like the Mark 8 project team group, for example, eventually what you'll see over here on the right hand side, when this renders, this tends to be a case here doing these webinars as of late. Kind of the further along it goes, the more things start to slow down a little bit. But okay, so now what you're looking at here is this is the inbox for the group that really is, again, kind of lurking behind the scenes of this Microsoft team. And so all I really want to do, I don't really care to use the inbox here. All I really want to do is go grab the calendar and get the calendar URL for this group. And so when I click on it here, again, this is the calendar for this team. I could change the view if I wanted to from weekly to monthly or whatever made sense, but let's just say I wanted to grab this by default. I'm going to grab the URL here and copy this. So I'm going to Control-C that. And then I'm going to go back into Teams. I'm going to choose website. Again, this is why website is one of my favorite tabs. And could do something as simple as say this is the calendar or the team calendar, whatever it is, and then paste that in. And while again it ain't pretty right now, in my opinion, it is definitely one simplistic way to be able to just go have a shared calendar, again, that's associated with the team, because this is part of that Microsoft 365 group. And then without having to flip back and forth out to Outlook, you could just pull that right in here in this case, okay? So if you're using this in this view, one of my recommendations is to, once it finally renders, this little option here at the very top left underneath the app launcher is the ability to toggle this pane on and off. You can just untoggle that or toggle it to where it collapses that pane that way. And then there you go. Now you've got this Teams calendar here rendering. Again, it ain't pretty, but I think it's a pretty useful workaround in this case. Okay. So hopefully some of you found that useful as well too.
That old trusty website tab.
Yes, yeah, that website tab is great. Okay, well, again, I think that's really about the entirety of what we wanted to cover with you guys today here in the webinar. We'll go ahead and just in closing, go ahead and flip back to the last slide of our presentation so you can have that up on the screen. This is the way that you can get in touch with all of us. You can certainly reach out to us on Twitter. You can reach out to us via our email addresses. If you have your mobile device handy and available to you, those QR codes on the right side of our names there will take you directly to our LinkedIn profile. So please feel free to connect to us on LinkedIn as well too. We love being able to connect with folks from webinars and hopefully get a chance to engage with you at some point. Joy or Stacy, anything else you guys want to weigh in on before we kind of tie it up?
Yes.
I think we're good, but next webinar, near and dear to my heart,
Yes.
SharePoint and Teams, #better together.
Yes, they really are. So awesome. Fantastic. Okay. Well, thanks again for taking some time out of your day to join with us, guys. We appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.